The Shallow Grave in East Mississippi. In the year 1971, East Mississippi was a place where life moved slow, but beneath its calm surface, secrets lay buried, some deeper than others. The summer air hung heavy with humidity, and cicadas hummed in the trees, their relentless buzzing a backdrop to the lives of the people who called this small patch of the South home. For 13 years, Eleanor and James Hargrove had been married. To the outside world, they were an ordinary family. She was a school teacher, beloved by her students and respected by the community for her sharp mind and warm heart. He was a mechanic, running his modest garage at the edge of town. Together, they had 3 children: Anna, who was 12, Abigail, who was 10, and little Charlie, just 7 years old. Their clapboard house stood at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by pines that stretched to the sky, their roots gripping the earth like secrets. But inside that house, trouble had been brewing for years. Eleanor had always been ambitious. She had dreams of a bigger life, one where she could provide her children with opportunities she never had growing up in a small farming town. She had put herself through college, working nights as a waitress, and had landed a job as the first-grade teacher in town. She loved teaching, loved the spark of curiosity in her students' eyes when they learned something new. She was proud of the life she was building, even if it was far from perfect. James, on the other hand, had no such ambitions. He was content to drink his evenings away at the Rusty Nail, the local dive bar, often stumbling home well past midnight. He was a man of simple pleasures: a full bottle of whiskey, a pack of cigarettes, and the occasional fling with a woman who wasn't his wife. He was arrogant, selfish, and unwilling to confront his own flaws. Eleanor had tried in the early years of their marriage to change him, but James was a man who resisted change like the devil resisted holy water. As Eleanor's career flourished, tensions in their marriage deepened. She made more money than James, and she didn't try to hide it. It wasn't in her nature to shrink herself to make him feel bigger. She began questioning how much longer she could endure his drinking, his infidelity, his lack of interest in their children. But she stayed for the kids' sake. She stayed because divorce was a shameful thing in East Mississippi, and she didn't want to be the subject of whispers on Sunday mornings at church. The night it all unraveled was a humid August evening. Eleanor had just gotten home from a parent-teacher meeting, her arms full of papers to grade. She found James in the kitchen, a bottle of Jack Daniels in one hand and a cigarette in the other. Charlie was crying upstairs, and Anna and Abigail were bickering in the living room over whose turn it was to watch the television. "Do you ever help with the kids?" Eleanor asked, setting her papers down on the counter with more force than she intended. James looked at her with bloodshot eyes and smirked. "What's gotten into you tonight?" "I'm tired, James," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm tired of coming home to this. To you, drunk and useless. To this mess of a house. To the way you don't even care about us anymore." James took a long drag of his cigarette and exhaled slowly, the smoke curling around his head like a halo. "Don't start with me, Ellie. Not tonight." But Eleanor couldn't stop. Years of frustration bubbled to the surface. She told him she knew about the women at the bar. She told him she deserved better, that their children deserved better. She told him she wasn't going to spend the rest of her life cleaning up his messes. "You think you're so much better than me, don't you?" James snarled, slamming his bottle down on the table. "Just 'cause you got that fancy college education and your little teaching job. You think you're better than me, but you're not. You're just a nagging, self-righteous—" "Don't you dare finish that sentence," Eleanor said, her voice cold and steady. But James didn't listen. He launched into a tirade, his words slurred but sharp enough to cut. Eleanor stood there, trembling with rage until she couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed her purse and keys and stormed out the door, leaving James alone with his whiskey and his bitterness. She didn't come back until late, after driving aimlessly through the dark country roads, her tears blurring the headlights of passing cars. When she returned, James was passed out on the couch, and the house was silent. She went to bed without waking him. Over the next few days, James stewed in his anger. He hated that Eleanor had spoken to him that way, hated that she was right about him, hated most of all that she was more successful than he was. He had always felt like he was living in her shadow, and now that shadow felt suffocating. And so, in the twisted corners of his mind, a plan began to form. He didn't think about the consequences. He didn't think about his children. He thought only of silencing the voice in his head that told him he was a failure, a voice that sounded an awful lot like Eleanor's. On a sweltering Saturday afternoon, while the kids played outside, James asked Eleanor to come to the garage. He said he needed help with something, and though she was hesitant, she followed him out back. What he did next was brutal and final. He grabbed a wrench from the workbench and struck her over the head. Her screams were brief, cut off by a second fatal blow. When it was over, James stood there, panting, staring at her lifeless body. The garage smelled of motor oil and blood, and the weight of what he had done pressed down on him like a vice. But he didn't stop there. He dragged her body to the backyard and set it on fire. Using gasoline from the lawnmower to feed the flames, he watched as the fire consumed her, the heat scorching his skin but not his conscience. When there was nothing left but ashes and bones, he dug a shallow grave beneath the pine trees and buried what remained of his wife. The aftermath. For the next few days, James acted as if nothing had happened. When the kids asked where their mother was, he told them she had left, that she needed some time away to think. It wasn't unusual for Eleanor to take a drive when she was upset, so the children believed him at first. But as the days turned into weeks, they began to ask more questions. "Where's Mama?" Charlie asked one night at dinner, his big brown eyes full of worry. "She'll be back soon," James said, his tone sharp enough to end the conversation. But Eleanor didn't come back, and the townsfolk started asking questions too. "Everything all right at home, James?" the bartender at the Rusty Nail asked one evening. "Haven't seen Eleanor around lately." "She's visiting her sister up in Memphis," James lied, taking a long swig of beer. The lie worked for a while, but not forever. Eleanor's colleagues at the school grew suspicious when she didn't return for the new school year. Her sister in Memphis, when contacted by a concerned neighbor, said she hadn't seen Eleanor in months. And then there were the kids, their confusion turning to fear, their whispers growing louder. It was Anna who finally told someone. She had overheard her father talking to himself one night, drunk and mumbling about the fire and the grave. She couldn't make sense of it, but she knew it was important. She told her teacher, who told the sheriff. Justice. The sheriff of East Mississippi was a no-nonsense man named Frank Delaney. He had known Eleanor since they were kids, and he didn't believe for a second that she would just up and leave her children. When he questioned James, the man's story fell apart under scrutiny. A search of the property revealed the shallow grave beneath the pines, and with it, the remains of Eleanor Hargrove. James was arrested and charged with murder. At the trial, he showed no remorse. He sat in the courtroom with his head held high, as if he were the victim, not Eleanor. The jury took less than an hour to convict him, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The aftermath, Eleanor's death, left a gaping hole in the lives of her children. Anna, Abigail, and Charlie went to live with their maternal grandparents, who did their best to provide a stable home. But the scars of that summer never fully healed. Anna grew up too fast, taking on a motherly role for her younger siblings. Abigail became quiet and withdrawn, her bright spirit dimmed. And Charlie, the youngest, struggled to understand why his mother was gone and his father had done such a terrible thing. As for James, he spent the rest of his days in a cold, gray cell, haunted by the life he had destroyed. No amount of whiskey could numb the guilt that seeped into his bones. He died alone and forgotten, his name spoken only as a cautionary tale in the small town he had once called home. And beneath the pines where the cicadas sang their mournful song, Eleanor rested in peace, her grave a silent testament to the darkness that can grow in the hearts of men. This story reflects the tragic consequences of unchecked anger, selfishness, and the destructive power of envy.